The fluorescent lights buzz at 0200 hours like insects trapped in plastic, and Megan O'Brien pushes through the employee entrance of Seattle General with the kind of invisibility that only comes from practice. 23 months of night shifts. 23 months of keeping her head down, her sleeves buttoned at the wrists despite the warm Carolina humidity, her voice softer than it needs to be. The hospital smells like antiseptic and floor wax and the particular staleness of air that's been recycled through 1,000 lungs. She badges through the ICU checkpoint without making eye contact with the security guard, a habit so ingrained it feels like breathing. Her badge reads RN Megan O'Brien. That much is real. Everything else is borrowed. The ICU spreads out before her in neat rows of beds, each one glowing with the soft blue light of monitors. 12 patients tonight. Stable, mostly. The kind of shift where nothing happens, where time moves the way it does at 0200, measured in beeps and the whisper of ventilators. She moves between rooms with the economical precision of someone who has practiced every motion 10,000 times until muscle memory became the only thinking she needed to do. Start here. Check vitals. Note the numbers. Move to the next bed. Her hand is steady as a surgical laser when she reaches for 4 lines. But something is different tonight, and she feels it before she knows it. The admission alerts come through the unit's overhead speaker in that clipped hospital monotone: incoming trauma, ICU bed 4, male, 72, unconscious on arrival, cardiac event in the field. The words themselves are routine. The way her entire body stops responding to them is not. She's standing at the medication cart, her fingers resting on a vial of heparin, when the name comes through. Colonel James Harker. Retired. Military. And the medication cart suddenly feels very far away from her body. 8 years. 8 years since Helmand Province. 8 years since the orders that didn't make sense, the tactical decision that would have left her team scattered across a mountainside in Loga Province like broken equipment. 8 years since she'd looked into those grey eyes, the same grey eyes she'd just seen on a gurney moving at 30 miles per hour down a hallway that suddenly felt smaller. Megan doesn't move. Doesn't breathe. Doesn't let her face shift by even the smallest fraction. But beneath her uniform, against her collarbone, the broken dog tag on its fractured chain seems to burn with a heat that shouldn't be possible. The chain snapped years ago, torn from her neck during the extraction that shouldn't have happened, the one that broke every protocol, the one that saved 12 soldiers and disavowed her from every official record. She's kept the jagged piece of metal close to her skin ever since, a piece of her partner's, a weight she never removes. The ICU nurse, Patterson, 3rd year, competent but not sharp, is already moving toward bed 4, so Megan forces her hands to finish their task. The vial caps go back on. The cart is pushed forward. She follows the admission team through the doors like she's part of the tide, not swimming against it. Colonel Harker looks smaller unconscious than he did in memory. The uniform is gone, replaced by a hospital gown that sits wrong on a frame that was built for command. His left arm is bandaged at the wrist, fresh gauze, blood showing through at the edges. Acute MI, the paramedic report says. Anterior wall. In the field. Lucky they were near a station, the paramedic notes. Lucky he was found. Lucky, 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 the word sitting in the paper like it means something good instead of a sentence that lands like shrapnel. I've got him from here. The voice comes from the doorway, and Megan feels the shift in air pressure that happens when competence walks into a room. Dr. Marcus Caldwell is 48, Harvard residency, staff cardiologist for 7 years, the kind of doctor whose name appears in hospital newsletters for outcomes that defied statistical probability. He wears a watch that costs more than Megan's monthly rent, a Patek Philippe with a deep blue face that catches the fluorescent light. His shoes are Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He looks at Colonel Harker the way a sommelier looks at a wine list, cataloguing, evaluating, planning. Then he looks at Megan. Nurse. Just the one word. Spoken in the tone people use when they're addressing objects that happen to have ears. Baseline assessment and continuous monitoring. EKG every 30 minutes for the first 6 hours. I want troponin and BMP every 4 hours. Full metabolic panel. Toxicology screen. He's reading from the chart without actually looking at it, the words coming out like he's had this conversation with 1,000 nurses and will have it with 1,000 more. Yes, doctor. Megan's voice is soft, deferential. The voice of someone who has learned that small voices take up less space in rooms like this. She steps forward, her movements careful and precise, and begins the physical assessment. Pulse at the carotid, too fast. Blood pressure, too low. Pupils, reactive but sluggish. She works around Caldwell like water flowing around a stone, her hands moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from having done this in field tents and military hospitals where every second counted for something that mattered. It's the chart that catches her attention. She's reading Harker's medication list while Caldwell is barking orders to the resident about cardiac enzymes, and something doesn't align. His documented cardiac history lists a stable ejection fraction of 55%, no prior arrhythmias, no documented hypertension. But the current medication regimen shows digoxin doses that would be appropriate for someone with an ejection fraction below 30%. Digitalis toxicity can present as arrhythmia. Can present as chest pain. Can present as cardiac arrest in a man who shouldn't be having one. She looks at the dosing again. Checks the dates. The prescriptions are current, filled 4 days ago, the pharmacy stamp sitting on the documentation like a small confession. Her eyes track across the rest of the medications, metoprolol at a dose slightly elevated from what his history would suggest, a calcium channel blocker at concentrations that would be aggressive for someone with his baseline vitals. The patterns are there. She sees them the way she learned to see things in Helmand Province, the way that saved her team. The way that got her erased. Caldwell moves closer to the monitors, his voice dropping to that tone doctors use when they're discussing patients as though the patients are furniture. Major cardiac event. Likely progression from existing underlying condition. We'll see what the enzymes show, but I'm anticipating significant myocardial damage. He pulls up Harker's previous medical records on the computer, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a kind of practiced arrogance. Prior to this, he was in stable condition. Excellent health for his age, in fact. The military records here are interesting. He glances back at Harker with something that might be curiosity or might be something with sharper edges. Special operations background. Doesn't say what kind, obviously. Those records are sealed. Megan feels the words like a physical pressure change. Sealed. Classified. The kind of words that describe her own life. She continues her assessment while Caldwell speaks, her hands checking the for access, adequate, but placed with less finesse than she would have used, and beginning the monitoring setup. The continuous cardiac monitoring shows sinus tachycardia with occasional PVCs, premature ventricular contractions. The kind of arrhythmias that can cluster into something dangerous, something fatal, in the right circumstances. Or the wrong ones. I'll need you to stay close tonight, Caldwell says, and it takes her a moment to realize he's speaking to her. Any change in status, any rhythm change, any decline in vitals, I want notification immediately. These early hours are critical. He's reviewing labs on the screen now, his face showing the kind of clinical satisfaction that people get when they're making sense of data. Troponin is already elevated. This is significant damage. Understood, doctor. She's still using the small voice, the deferential voice. She's been practicing it for 23 months. But behind the voice, in the part of her brain that remembers Helmand Province and extraction routes and the weight of 12 lives depending on her reading the situation correctly, something is waking up. The medication discrepancy sits in her mind like a warning light that won't turn off. She finishes the primary assessment and steps back, allowing Caldwell to conduct his own examination. His thorough, she notes with something that isn't quite respect. His palpation is gentle but comprehensive. His auscultation picks up the fine crackles at the lung bases that indicate pulmonary edema. His percussion identifies the areas of consolidation. He's a good doctor, technically. She can see that the way you see technical competence in any field, the way the movements flow, the way he reads what his hands are telling him. But good doctors don't prescribe digoxin to cardiac patients with normal ejection fractions, and they don't do it to multiple patients without cause. Patterson is charting in the corner, her fingers moving across the electronic medical record with the slow, methodical pace of someone who doesn't understand what she's looking at. Caldwell is on his phone in the hallway, speaking to someone in a voice too low to hear, but Megan catches fragments. Status update. No complications. Exactly as planned. The words sit wrong in her chest. The ICU lights buzz above her like something trapped. What she should do is go about her shift the way she's been taught, the way protocol demands. What she should do is check the monitors every 15 minutes and record the vitals in the system and be the invisible presence that nursing is supposed to be. What she should do is ignore the feeling that's crawling up her spine, that feeling that got her disavowed from an organization that had trained her to survive anything but the burden of what she'd chosen to survive for. But the broken dog tag beneath her scrub seems to pull her forward, and her feet carry her to the medication cart when Caldwell isn't watching. She pulls Harker's medication profile again. Checks the historical records she has access to. Looks at the pharmacy documentation. The pieces sit in front of her like a map she's been trained to read, and what they spell out makes her breath stick in her chest. The night shift stretches ahead of her in minutes that feel like hours, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the fluorescent lights, a truth is beginning to crystallize that will change everything. The medication discrepancies bloom across her screen like a dark constellation she's trained to read. Megan sits alone in the medication room at 0430 hours, the fluorescent lights casting everything in institutional white, and she pulls up Colonel Harker's chart first. The documented heart condition reads, stable arrhythmia, controlled on current regimen. But the orders show something else. The dosages don't match. The timing intervals don't match. Someone has altered them, subtle enough to escape casual review, but unmistakable to someone who spent 18 years understanding how bodies fail. She opens the comparison file she built 3 hours ago and cross-references 3 other veteran patients from the past 6 months. All male. All with documented cardiac histories. All with medication orders that tell a story nobody's supposed to read. The pattern emerges like a map drawn in invisible ink. The dosages aren't mistakes. They're systematic. Deliberate. Designed to look like clinical adjustments made by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Her hands stay steady on the keyboard. Pain is data. Fear is information. She's reading the data now. She approaches Dr. Caldwell outside the ICU at 0515 hours, in the hallway where he stands reviewing charts with the precision of someone who never misses a detail. The overhead lights hum their fluorescent frequency, and when he looks up, his eyes are the color of ice water. Dr. Caldwell, I need to flag something about Colonel Harker's medication regimen. She speaks quietly. Keeps her hands visible. Deferential. The dosages don't align with his documented condition history. I pulled comparison charts on 3 other veteran patients and found the same pattern. The alterations appear. His smile arrives like a shark breaking the surface. That's an interesting word choice, Nurse O'Brien. One might wonder what gives you the authority to be pulling comparison charts outside your assigned care responsibilities. She doesn't flinch. Doesn't blink. They need to be reviewed by cardiology. They will be. Appropriately. By the attending physician. He turns back to his charts. Your shift reassignment is effective immediately. Your move to night rotation on the psychiatric wing. No ICU access. He doesn't look at her again. Doesn't need to. Within 24 hours, she understands his strategy. The man is competent the way a precision instrument is competent. Caldwell doesn't yell or threaten. He simply positions pieces on a board only he can see. He reassigns her away from the ICU first, removes her access, eliminates her ability to raise further concerns. But that's not enough. He needs to neutralize her credibility before anyone asks questions about why she was pulled. The written warning appears on the unit bulletin board at 0600 hours on the second day, posted in the space where every nurse stops during shift change. The paper is official. Letterhead from the hospital administration office, though everyone knows whose hand guided the language. Nurse O'Brien, formal reprimand. Overstepping clinical boundaries. Unauthorized access to patient files outside assigned care responsibilities. Further violations will result in immediate termination. 18 staff members read it in silence. Megan watches their eyes move across the words and then away from her. The message is clear. He's not disciplining her. He's inoculating the unit against her. Whatever she says now, whatever truth she speaks, it will be interpreted through the lens of obsession. Inappropriate fixation. Boundary violation. A nurse who couldn't handle the case and invented a conspiracy to cope. The silence in the break room comes next. She sits down with her coffee at 0630 hours, just before shift change. Holds the mug between her hands like it might warm something that's gone cold inside her. Head nurse Patterson stands. Then the night shift RN, then the respiratory therapist who'd borrowed her scrub cap 2 weeks ago. They file out without speaking. Not angry. Worse. Pitying. The kind of silence that says they believe he's right about her. That she'd lost her objectivity. That she needed to be removed. Megan sits alone at the table. The coffee steams. Her hands don't shake. They won't shake. Not yet. The final humiliation arrives at 1100 hours when Harker's daughter visits the ICU. She's in her 40s, carries her father's jaw structure, and she sits beside his bed while monitors track his vital signs in steady beeps and numbers. Dr. Caldwell enters the room with the timing of someone who orchestrates every entrance. His voice is pitched just loud enough for the hallway to hear. For the nurses at the station to hear. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to address something about your father's care. Nurse O'Brien has become inappropriately fixated on his case. She's been accessing his records outside her assigned responsibilities and has made some concerning assumptions about his treatment regimen. He uses the professional voice. The voice that sounds reasonable. Protective. Like he's warning a family member about someone unstable. We have concerns about her judgment. In situations where nurses have experienced trauma themselves, sometimes they project those experiences onto their patients. It can affect their clinical reasoning. We've reassigned her to ensure your father receives objective, evidence-based care from someone without a personal investment in the case. Colonel Harker's eyes open. They've been closed most of the day, but they open now. His daughter reaches for his hand, and Caldwell turns to Megan with an expression of practiced sympathy. The kind of look a good doctor gives to someone he's just removed from service. Sad. Concerned. Certain. Clean out your ICU locker by end of shift. Not a request. A command wrapped in civility. Harker's gaze finds hers across the room. She sees recognition there. Sees him understanding what's happening. The same officer who'd court-martialed her 8 years ago is watching her be systematically destroyed by someone who knows exactly how to make the truth sound like delusion. The single dog tag beneath her uniform burns against her skin. Megan takes one measured breath. Her hands are steady. Her voice, when she speaks, arrives from somewhere deeper than fear. Colonel Harker deserves better than a doctor who changes medication records at 2 a.m. The room goes dead silent. Not the comfortable silence of agreement. The shocked silence of someone speaking truth where lies are more convenient. Caldwell's smile never wavers. But something shifts in his eyes. A recognition that she's not going to disappear quietly. That she's not going to accept his version of events without resistance. He pulls his expression back into professional concern. I think it's best if we step out of the patient's room, Nurse O'Brien. Your shift ends in 4 hours. Please ensure your locker is cleared by then. He walks out. The daughter follows, apologizing to her father about the disruption. Harker's eyes stay on Megan for 3 more seconds. She doesn't look away. She lets him see that she's still here. That whatever he did to her 8 years ago, Whatever orders he gave that cost her everything, she's standing in front of him anyway, protecting him anyway, even as she's being destroyed for it. She wipes the single tear without breaking eye contact with Caldwell as he leaves. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part arrives at 0300 hours on her final ICU shift, when the code blue alarm shrieks through the 4th floor like a living thing, and everything she's been afraid of crystallizes into the moment she's trained her entire body to survive. The code blue alarm shrieked through the 4th floor at 0300 hours like a living thing, and Megan's hands moved before her brain caught up. She was 3 doors down, checking the 4 line on a post-op cardiac patient, when that sound cut through the dark hallway, the same sound that meant someone was dying. That time had collapsed into a single moment where every second felt like a surgical incision. Her feet knew where to go. Her body knew the path to Harker's room before her mind could process the 3 words crackling through the overhead speaker: Code Blue, ICU 4. She pushed through the double doors. Harker lay motionless on the bed, his chest not rising, his monitors screaming a flat line into the sterile air. Dr. Reese, the attending resident Caldwell had strategically scheduled for the weakest overnight team, stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his hands hanging at his sides like useless instruments. 2 nurses were fumbling with the crash cart, their movements panicked and inefficient. The room smelled like sweat and fear and the sharp tang of adrenaline, copper and electricity mixing into something ancient. "Move," Megan said. It wasn't a request. Her voice had dropped an octave, and every person in the room heard it. She didn't wait for Reese to respond. She was already moving, her hands already reaching for the needle from the trauma tray, her fingers already finding the precise point where she needed to work, the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, above his ribs but below his collarbone. This was a needle decompression. This was Special Forces combat medicine. This was something a civilian nurse from Seattle General should never, ever know how to do. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping was the sound of pressure releasing, of a collapsed lung re-inflating, of physics and anatomy and 8 years of buried training converging into a single perfect moment. The heart monitor beeped once. Twice. Then steadied into something close to a rhythm. "Get me a chest seal," she said. "We don't have," one of the nurses started. "MRE package. Trauma bag. Bottom left." Her hands were moving, her muscle memory translating itself into civilian medical equipment. She'd done this in a compound in San Juan Valley with nothing but duct tape and improvised supplies. She could do it with a modern hospital's resources. She was already opening the sterile field, already accessing the supplies, already constructing an improvised chest seal from the packaging materials that would hold until proper surgical intervention became possible. Reese watched her work. His face had gone pale, not from the crisis but from understanding, from recognizing that this woman in scrubs, this nurse he'd been told was reckless and boundary crossing, was performing procedures that belonged in military field hospitals, not civilian ICUs. "Vitals?" she asked. "Blood pressure climbing," a nurse said, her voice shaking. 95/60. Heart rate stabilizing at 118. O2 sat 89 and rising. The room had shifted. The panic had transformed into something else, a kind of shocked reverence that came from witnessing competence so complete it was almost frightening. No one was fumbling anymore. Everyone was moving with precision, responding to her unspoken commands like soldiers in formation. The monitor showed a regular rhythm now, something close to a heartbeat, something close to life. Harker's eyes moved beneath his eyelids. "Good work," she said, but she was already stepping back, already removing the latex gloves with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. "Get him upstairs. Cardiothoracic surgery. Now." She walked out before they could thank her. Before anyone could ask questions. Before the weight of what she'd just revealed could settle on her shoulders like a military-grade tactical vest. The hallway was empty at 0300 hours. Just her and the fluorescent lights humming their endless mechanical song above her head. She had 47 minutes before Dr. Caldwell would arrive. He came through the ER doors at 03 for 7 hours, moving with the precision of a man who had already won, who had already prepared his documentation and aligned his allies and calculated every variable in the equation. Security was with him, not hospital security but actual police, which meant he'd made calls, had used his position, had leveraged whatever institutional power kept him elevated above accountability. His voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. "I need to speak with Nurse O'Brien," he said to the charge nurse, though his eyes were searching the ICU for her. She was in the supply room, logging equipment. She had known he would come. She had known the moment she'd performed that needle decompression that she had just ended her career at Seattle General. Military muscle memory was a thing you couldn't fake, couldn't explain away, couldn't dress up as standard nursing protocol. She had exposed herself. She had revealed that Major Megan O'Brien, disavowed Special Forces officer, officially erased from the military records and buried under a civilian identity for 8 years, was walking the corridors of a hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina, wearing hospital scrubs and a name badge instead of body armor. Caldwell found her in the supply room, just her and the shelves of gauze and tape and medical equipment surrounding her like walls. He had his phone in his hand, and she could see the Notes app open, prepared statements, documentation already drafted, accusations already written before this moment had even happened. "That procedure you performed on Colonel Harker was beyond your scope of practice," he said. His voice was smooth as glass, sharp as a blade. "You performed what appears to be a needle decompression, a military trauma procedure, on a civilian patient in a civilian hospital. That's not just a boundary violation, Ms. O'Brien. That's evidence of practicing medicine without a license." She said nothing. Saying nothing had become her superpower, the thing that kept her invisible, that kept the buried identity buried. "I've already called the board of directors," he continued. "I have documented evidence of your pattern of insubordination, your obsession with Colonel Harker's case, and now this reckless intervention that happens to align perfectly with your military background, which you failed to disclose on your employment application." He paused, letting each sentence settle like a stone dropped into still water. "I'm recommending your immediate termination and credential deactivation, pending criminal investigation." She met his eyes for the first time since entering the supply room. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The trembling wasn't fear, the trembling was restraint, was the effort of keeping herself contained, of preventing the Major from stepping out and taking command of this conversation in ways that would destroy everything she'd built. "Colonel Harker would have died without that procedure," she said. 6 words. Measured. Quiet. "That's debatable," Caldwell replied. "And it's irrelevant. You've violated every protocol in this hospital, and you've done it in a way that suggests you're operating under a completely different training paradigm than the one we recognize here. I'm having your badge deactivated at 0600 hours. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal effects are being collected as we speak." She watched him turn to leave, watched him walk back toward the ICU with the confidence of a man who had just closed a case, sealed a threat, and removed an obstacle. She had 18 hours left at Seattle General. 18 hours until her credentials were deactivated. 18 hours until the woman she'd constructed brick by brick for 8 years, Megan O'Brien, civilian nurse, no military background, no classified operations, no buried rank, would cease to exist on paper. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Caldwell still didn't understand what he'd just done. He still didn't realize that he hadn't been fighting a nurse he could bully and discredit and silence. He'd been fighting a major in the United States Army Special Forces, a woman who'd survived black sites and classified operations and the kind of darkness that most people would never glimpse, and he'd just made her a target by opening doors that very powerful people had spent 8 years keeping locked. The next 18 hours would determine whether he lived long enough to regret that decision. By 0600 hours, Caldwell had made good on his threats with a precision that would have been impressive if it wasn't so methodical. The chief nursing officer had received his call at dawn, patient safety concern, credential investigation, full background review flagged. By 0800 hours, HR had requested her personnel file. By 1200 hours, the peer review had been scheduled for 1400 hours, stacked with allies who would nod along with whatever narrative Caldwell had prepared, nodding along like judges at a trial that had already been decided before it began. She worked her final hours in silence, moving through the ICU like a ghost, checking on patients, adjusting monitors, doing the work that had filled her life for 8 years. No one met her eyes anymore. Her colleagues had already decided. The written warning was still on the unit board, and now there was whisper about the procedure she'd performed, whisper about her military background, whisper about whether she could be trusted with patients at all. At 1,400 hours, she sat across from 3 hospital administrators and Dr. Caldwell in a conference room on the 5th floor. The windows looked out over Raleigh, and she could see the afternoon sun illuminating the parking lots, the streets, the spaces where normal people went about their normal lives without wondering if their security clearance had been compromised, without wondering if their buried identity was about to surface in ways that would violate national security protocols. Caldwell presented his documentation with the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment. Pattern of boundary violations. Scope of practice violations. Undisclosed military background. Reckless decision-making in a controlled medical environment. Each accusation was precise. Each one was designed to remove her from the hospital before anyone important asked the right questions. She listened. She said nothing. When they asked for her response, she met Caldwell's eyes and said, "I performed a medical intervention that saved a patient's life. I followed no protocols that conflict with my licensure. Everything else is your interpretation." It wasn't a defense. It was a statement of fact. It was the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. And Caldwell, watching her face, seemed to recognize for the first time that he wasn't dealing with a nurse he could intimidate. He was dealing with something else entirely, something trained, something dangerous, something that had spent 8 years learning how to exist in spaces where normal rules didn't apply. "Your badge," he said, extending his palm just after 1,600 hours in the administrative office, his voice carrying an edge now, a vibration of something like fear. "And your credentials are hereby deactivated. You're to have no further access to hospital facilities." She removed the badge from her scrub pocket and placed it in his hand. The plastic was warm from her body, and when he closed his fingers around it, she saw something flicker in his expression, a moment of uncertainty, a moment where he wondered if he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. She walked out without her belongings. She walked out past Harker's room and saw him watching her from the ICU bed, his eyes following her with a recognition that had been 8 years in coming, and something in that look told her that this wasn't over. This was just the moment before everything changed. The parking garage was empty when she sat down in her car. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and didn't turn the key. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, and somewhere above Raleigh, the sky was making decisions that would change everything. The parking garage at Seattle General was a tomb of concrete and fluorescent hum, the kind of place where sound dies before it travels. Spot D47. Megan sat behind the steering wheel with her forehead pressed against it, not moving, not breathing in any way that mattered. The engine was dead. She'd left the headlights on 2 days ago, forgot they existed the moment Harker's heart stopped beating, forgot everything except the needle sliding in and Caldwell's face when he understood what she'd just done. That was 48 hours ago. Now her badge was gone. Her credentials were deactivated. Her locker had been cleared by hospital security before sunrise, everything she'd accumulated in 8 years of careful anonymity stuffed into a cardboard box that someone had left on the passenger seat. She hadn't opened it yet. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like angry wasps trapped in plastic. What Caldwell had done in the hours after the code blue was masterful in its precision. He didn't rage. He didn't accuse. Instead, he'd assembled documentation, page after page of prepared statements, incident reports that seemed to materialize from nowhere, as if he'd been building his case for weeks, waiting for the moment she'd prove useful to him. Boundary violations. Erratic behavior. Insubordination during multiple shifts. Notes written in his own handwriting, dated 3 months back, describing concerns about her obsessive focus on medication records and her inappropriate familiarity with patient charts. The work of a man who knew exactly how institutional power moved, how a paper trail could strangle a person without ever touching them. He'd made calls before dawn. Megan heard about it from Patterson, who'd looked at her with something between pity and fear. Calls to the board of directors. Calls to the chief nursing officer. Calls to hospital administration, all while Megan was still sitting in the ICU waiting room, knowing what was coming but unable to stop it, unable to even try. By 0600 hours, her credentials were deactivated. The system rejected her password. The badge reader at the staff entrance beeped once and showed red. She'd walked to her locker to retrieve her personal items and found them already boxed, waiting. Not packed with care. Dumped. Stethoscope wrapped around a pair of scrubs. The photo of Marcus in his school uniform, crumpled. Her extra shoes, laces hanging. Someone's efficiency, Caldwell's, probably. He'd thought ahead, ensured that even her small rebellion would be erased before she could voice it. The competence of it made her stomach turn in a way that fear never could. Fear was clean. This was calculated. This was a man who understood that the most effective destruction didn't look like anger, it looked like procedure. Megan had gone to his office at 1400 hours on the day they fired her, though no one called it firing. Reduction in force, they said. Staffing adjustment. Caldwell sat behind his desk with his hands folded, waiting for her. He knew she'd come. He'd known she'd come the moment he called security, the moment he decided that her greatest strength, her steady refusal to bend under pressure, would be reframed as her greatest threat. Your badge, he said quietly. Not a request. A command. She'd set it on his desk without speaking. The badge clattered against the mahogany, a sound small enough to ignore. That's when she understood the trap she'd walked into, the truth about what she'd done, about who she was, would surface everything. Disavowed operators don't get civilian lives. They get buried. They get new names and social security numbers and explicit orders to never exist again. She had a son. Marcus was 17, tall like his father, and he would become leverage the moment she admitted anything out loud. The moment she said the word Special Forces, the moment she claimed the rank that had been burned out of her file 8 years ago, the moment she told anyone she'd been court-martialed for an order she refused to follow, Marcus would stop being safe. So she'd walked out of Caldwell's office without a word, turned in her scrubs at the locker room, and driven to the parking garage in a daze. That was yesterday. Or 2 days ago. Time was moving strangely now. The dead engine meant the battery had been drained completely. She couldn't even run the air conditioning. The August heat was building inside the car like a living thing, the smell of hot vinyl and accumulated coffee cups and the phantom scent of antiseptic that seemed to live in her skin now. She'd been a nurse for 8 years. Before that, she'd been someone else, someone who gave orders, someone who carried weapons, someone who understood that disobedience was sometimes the only ethical choice. Colonel James Harker had ordered her to hold position in Helmand Province while a 12-person team bled out a click north. She'd disobeyed. She'd saved all 12. He'd court-martialed her. She'd disappeared into a new identity with a new name and a son who would never know what his mother actually was. The parking garage was empty except for a security camera that blinked red in the corner, recording no one, watching nothing that mattered. Her car sat in shadow. Outside, the rain was starting to fall, not the gentle kind, but the kind that came on fast and heavy, the kind that made the asphalt steam. She could hear it on the roof of the car, a rhythm that sounded like applause for her own destruction. 48 hours ago she'd saved a man's life by breaking her cover. 48 hours ago she'd proven exactly what she was trained to do. And now she was unemployable, unbondable, and radioactive to anyone who might hire her. She couldn't even turn the key. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister in Denver asking if she was coming to Marcus's school event. A text from her dentist reminding her about a cleaning appointment. A text from an unknown number that she almost deleted before reading, administrators meeting, 3rd floor, 1100 hours tomorrow. Your attendance required. Hospital board. She almost laughed. Required. As if she still had the legal standing to be required anywhere. As if she was anything but a ghost now, haunting the hospital parking garage with a dead engine and a cardboard box of everything she'd built. That's when the passenger door opened. Marcus stood there in his school uniform, tie loose around his neck, backpack hanging off one shoulder, and his face was red from running. He was 17 and 6'2", and he looked exactly like his father, like a soldier, even though he'd never been anywhere near a uniform. Behind him, security was jogging from the stairwell, but slowly, because they weren't sure what they were looking at yet. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable. "We need to go upstairs." "Marcus, no." Her voice came out rough. "Get in the car. We're leaving." But he was already moving away, already heading back toward the hospital entrance, and in his shaking hands was a shadow box she'd hidden in a storage unit with explicit instructions that he was never, ever supposed to touch it. She'd been so careful. She'd buried that entire life 8 years ago, sealed it in dark velvet and locked it behind steel, and her 17-year-old son was carrying it like a torch into a building that was about to catch fire. She was out of the car before the thought finished forming, moving on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. The parking garage echoed with the sound of her boots on concrete, a rhythm she recognized from another lifetime, the steady pace of someone who wasn't asking permission anymore. The parking garage echoed with the sound of her boots on concrete, a rhythm she recognized from another lifetime, the steady pace of someone who wasn't asking permission anymore. She was halfway to the storage unit when she saw him. Marcus stood in the shadows near the elevator, rain-soaked and shaking, holding something wrapped in dark cloth. Her 17-year-old son. The one she'd protected from this life, from the secrets, from everything. "Mom." His voice cracked like breaking ice. "I broke the lock. I'm sorry, but He unwrapped the cloth with trembling hands. The shadow box. The one she'd kept in the storage unit under 6 layers of tarps and old photo albums. His hand shook so badly the metals clinked against the glass. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched her past materialize in her son's grip, each decoration catching the fluorescent light like a confession she'd never meant to make. "There's a hospital meeting. Right now. The board. They're voting on whether to file charges against you." Marcus's breathing came fast, panicked. "They're saying you assaulted Dr. Caldwell, that you exceeded your scope, that you cost him his reputation." "Mom, they're going to press criminal charges unless," he thrust the box toward her. "Unless they know who you are. Unless they understand what these mean. Come on. We have to go. Now." She took the box. Her hands were steady. Always steady. Her sons weren't. The hospital administrator's conference room fell silent when Marcus walked through the doors, a teenager in rain-soaked clothes, his jaw set with something that looked like his mother's composure, holding a shadow box like a shield. 12 people around a mahogany table, all of them turning. Dr. Caldwell was there. And the chief medical officer. And someone Megan didn't recognize, a woman in business casual with an FBI credential hanging from her neck. "Mom, they need to see these." Marcus's voice didn't waver. He placed the shadow box on the table and stepped back. "My mother is Major Megan O'Brien. United States Army Special Forces. And you're about to make the biggest mistake of your careers." The silence stretched thin enough to snap. Head nurse Patterson stood first, hands trembling as she reached for the box. Her eyes found Megan's for one instant, recognition and shock and something like awe, before she opened the citation Megan had never shown anyone. Patterson's voice shook as she read aloud, in recognition of extraordinary heroism in combat operations, Helmand Province, 2016. Then Captain Megan O'Brien demonstrated exceptional tactical leadership under fire, executing an unauthorized but operationally critical evacuation that preserved the lives of 12 personnel despite direct orders to the contrary. Each word landed like a detonation. Bronze Star. Patterson's hands trembled. She lifted the decoration, held it toward the light. The board members leaned forward. Silver Star. Her voice cracked. She set each one down with reverence, as if handling something holy. 2 purple hearts. And she stopped. Her breath caught. Navy Cross for actions above and beyond the call of duty. The door opened. Commander Price walked in, grey temples, SEAL team insignia on his jacket, eyes like someone who'd seen the worst the world had to offer and survived anyway. He moved to the table with the fluid precision of an apex predator, and every person in that room felt the atmospheric pressure change. Each of these decorations, Price said, his voice steady and low, represents something most of you will never understand. He touched the Navy Cross. This one means she saved people who couldn't save themselves. He looked at Caldwell. This one means she walked through fire to do it. And this one, he lifted the silver star, and his voice cracked like weathered concrete breaking under pressure. This one means she did it in Helmand Province when everything was falling apart, when her commanding officer ordered her to abandon her unit, and she said no. She said no and saved 12 soldiers. One of them is sitting in your ICU right now. Colonel James Harker. The chief medical officer's face went white. Then the woman with the FBI credential stood. Special Agent Torres, she introduced herself, pulling a tablet from her briefcase. The conference room screen flickered to life, medication logs, timestamp after timestamp, digital signatures glowing red. Dr. Caldwell, Torres said, her voice carrying the weight of certainty, you've been administering unapproved dosages to veteran patients for the past 8 months. Alterations made at 0200 hours. Patterns across 15 individuals. Doses designed to mask the complications from a surgical error on June 14 of last year, a patient named Robert Chen, a retired Marine, who died under your care. Caldwell's face drained of color. Your complaint against Nurse O'Brien, Torres continued, gave us probable cause for a warrant. Your attempt to destroy her credibility forced the audit that exposed your falsified records. Your own weapon destroyed you. She nodded to 2 agents standing by the door. Your medical license is suspended pending criminal charges. Systematic elder abuse. Obstruction of justice. Opioid diversion. Caldwell stood so fast his chair clattered backward. His competence, that terrifying surgical precision that had dismantled Megan's career with prepared documentation and institutional manipulation, shattered like cheap glass. The mask dropped. His eyes went wild. He turned to Megan, his voice a ragged thing. You had no right. You're nobody. You don't even exist. Megan met his gaze with that same quiet dignity, the kind that comes from having already survived the worst. She took one measured breath. Colonel Harker exists. And he deserved better. The agents moved without ceremony. Caldwell was escorted to the door, handcuffed, his protests echoing down the hallway as his career ended in fluorescent light and tile. The board members stood, backing away from the space he'd occupied like it was contagious, apologies forming on their lips. But Megan was already moving, Marcus beside her, the shadow box under her arm. In the ICU, Harker was sitting up. Tubes removed. His daughter at his bedside. When Megan walked past, he called her name, not the Nurse O'Brien but her real name, the rank he'd court-martialed 8 years ago. Major O'Brien. She stopped. He extended his hand. In his palm was the matching dog tag, the one from the shadow box. Its chain was new, the metal mended, the broken links replaced with something stronger. I was wrong, he said, and his weathered voice carried the weight of confession. 8 years ago, I was wrong. You saved 12 lives that day. You saved mine 2 nights ago. I'm going to testify at Caldwell's trial. I'm going to tell them exactly what happened in Helmand Province. The world needs to know who you are. She took the dog tag. Felt the weight of recognition after 8 years of hiding. Fastened the chain around her neck, felt both medals rest against her chest like armor finally coming home. 2 months later, Megan stood in the rose garden wearing a blue dress instead of scrubs, Marcus beside her in his first suit, as the President of the United States fastened the Presidential Citizen's Medal around her neck. The citation mentioned her military background, carefully worded to avoid classified details, but the Medal of Honor recipients in the front row knew exactly who she was. One of them had served under her command. They knew what that Navy Cross meant. The cameras flashed. Her story had gone public, the nurse who saved the colonel, who brought down the corrupt doctor, who carried the weight of classified secrets and a broken dog tag until the truth demanded she stand in the light. Seattle General had offered her head of emergency services. She'd declined. Instead, she'd accepted a position at Walter Reed, working with combat medics transitioning to civilian medicine, teaching them that the bravest thing wasn't always the loudest choice. At Seattle General in Raleigh, Dr. Caldwell worked the night security desk, 2200 to 0600 hours, checking badges of nurses who walked past without meeting his eyes. His medical license was permanently revoked. His plea bargain kept him out of federal prison by the thinnest margin. He watched Meghan's White House ceremony on the break room television during his 0200 lunch, saw her shake hands with generals, saw the dog tag visible at her throat on its mended chain. In the ceremony's final moment, Meghan stood at the podium with Marcus and Commander Price watching from the wings and Harker in dress uniform in the front row, and she spoke one sentence that would become the closing quote on every news story about her: "Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns." The camera found Harker, tears streaming down his weathered face, saluting the soldier he'd tried to destroy. The nurse who saved his life anyway. If this story hit you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to know what quiet strength looks like. Comment below, what would you have done in Meghan's position? Like this video and let me know, your stories matter.